This video is sponsored by War Thunder. This is one of the most important aircraft ever produced, the Boeing B-29 Super Fortress. And not because it dropped nuclear bombs on Japan, and not because it was able to launch a small fighter jet from its belly. It was because it paved the way for all of us to be able to fly at 33,000 feet without wearing an oxygen mask or having to dress like a Mount Everest climber. The B-29 was the most advanced bomber in the world at the time. It was larger, faster, able to fly higher, and had more range than any other bomber. It was so modern that 35 years later, even the cockpit of the almighty Millennium Falcon was based on the B-29's cabin. The Super Fortress was even deemed invincible, since it was able to outrun and outclimb enemy fire. Not quite like the SR-71, of course, because the B-29 project was more expensive than the SR-71 Blackbirds. It was even more expensive than developing the atomic bomb. The US government spent $3 billion developing the B-29 while spending only $2 billion on the Manhattan Project. The Super Fortress was the most expensive project of World War II, costing $65 billion in 2025 dollars. That's the entire budget of the Belgium Armed Forces for the next 10 years. Despite being the most expensive weapon of the war, the Super Fortress was both good and bad. The B-29 bomber was so good that even the Soviets reverse-engineered an exact copy of it, the Tupolev Tu-4, and produced over 800 of them. At the same time, this airplane was so bad that the ongoing joke was that the crew were more likely to be killed by Curtiss Wright, the airplane's engine manufacturer, than by the Japanese. Indeed, the B-29's crew of 11 were almost twice as likely to die from the airplane disintegrating mid-flight due to a mechanical failure than being shot down by Japanese interceptors. During its first 6 months of operations, the loss rate was 1 in 10 sorties due to mechanical failure. This was ironic, considering that the Super Fortress was the most advanced bomber ever built, with every component essentially designed from scratch. Well, there's a hint, I suppose. But why the most revolutionary feature of the B-29 couldn't even be used in combat? Why the takeoff phase of the Super Fortress was the most dangerous part of the flight? Why the manufacturing of the B-29 was nothing short of a giant cluster fudge? And how Nagasaki became the unintended target of a nuclear bomb is not what you think. So what was the B-29's most revolutionary feature? Let's set the stage first. Traveling above 25,000 feet allows an aircraft to fly above turbulence and enables the engines to perform most efficiently because the aircraft moves through the atmosphere with much less resistance. However, above 8,000 feet, most individuals start experiencing symptoms of hypoxia due to lower oxygen concentration in the atmosphere. Hypoxia symptoms appear based on the altitude. For example, at 30,000 feet, the time of useful consciousness, or TUC, is just 30 seconds, while at 25,000 feet, the TUC is between 3 and 5 minutes. But the issue of hypoxia can be resolved with administration of supplemental oxygen. This is why in the early days of World War II, bomber crews relied on oxygen masks that were tethered by oxygen hoses. But it gets worse. When flying at high altitudes, the temperatures could easily drop to negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It also didn't help that the B-17 gunners had to keep their windows open while firing at enemy fighters. This meant that even heavy sheepskin jackets were not enough to keep the crew warm. So instead, electrically heated flight suits such as the F-1 Blue Bunny were used. Not the best way to fight a war, if you ask me. An alternative to wearing oxygen masks while flying at high altitudes was to pressurize the cabin, or play War Thunder, which is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made and is now available for free on all platforms. You can immerse yourself in War Thunder's realistic graphics, commanding any of the 2,500 plus ships, tanks, or aircraft, without the need for a fancy gaming computer. You can play arcade for fast-paced, simplified action, simulator for a fully immersive experience, or realistic, which is the balance between the two other modes. There's simply no game better suited for fans of military history. So play War Thunder on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile. If you're a new player or haven't played in 6 months, use my links below to receive a massive bonus pack with lots of goodies for a head start, like 3 premium vehicles, a 50% experience and income booster, 2 advanced vehicles for rent, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. This is a limited time offer, so don't miss it. The first pressurized cabin was built on the DH-9 that could fly to an altitude of 30,000 feet. Without a pressurized cabin, pilots in the 1930s had to rely on pressure suits for high-altitude flying. And that's exactly what we would have had to wear inside a modern Boeing passenger jet if it wasn't for the pressurized cabin. While it wasn't the first pressurized aircraft, the Superfortress was a true game-changer, the first to bring this cutting-edge technology into mass production. The pressurized cabin allowed the bomber's crew to fly without wearing oxygen masks and work in a temperature-controlled environment. For this reason, the crew often referred to the Superfortress as the Cadillac of bombers in terms of comfort. But unlike modern jetliners, the B-29 was not fully pressurized. Instead, it had 2 pressurized compartments forward and aft, a pressurized tail gunner compartment, and an access tunnel between the rear and front cabins, through which the crew could crawl. The bomb bay was not pressurized. Today, the same basic pressurization system used in the B-29 is still used in modern commercial jets. Compressed air is taken from the engine compressors and sent through air conditioners. It's then circulated throughout the cabin and finally to the outflow valve and released into the atmosphere. Another similarity between the Superfortress and the modern airliners is the circular fuselage shape. That's because a perfect circle maintains its shape under pressure. Combined, the systems designed for the B-29, such as the airflow control, temperature regulation, and leak prevention, played a foundational role in the later development of civil aircraft. Without pressurized cabins, long-distance flying would be impractical today. Interestingly, during combat, the B-29 could not use the pressurization feature, because if a bullet from an enemy fighter or enemy flak struck a pressurized part of the aircraft, it would result in rapid decompression or even an unzip. Unzipping could occur during a rapid decompression, when the fuselage would split open along a stress line and everything would fly through it outside. To avoid such chaos during the most critical part of the mission, whenever the B-29 entered a combat area, the crew went on oxygen and the aircraft was depressurized to prevent unzipping. When the bomber left the combat area, the cabin would be repressurized and the crew would take off the oxygen masks and the heavy electrically heated suits. If there were any bullet holes caused by the battle damage, the crew had the ability to patch them to repressurize the aircraft. As a high-altitude strategic bomber, the B-29's mission was to bridge the gap of the enormous Pacific Ocean and bring the strategic bombing that was applied to German manufacturing facilities to Japan. The US Army Air Forces needed a bomber with higher combat range that could carry more weapons. But that was not all. Since the bomber was pressurized, that meant no more open windows to fire the machine guns. While the Superfortress had a manned tail turret, 4 other turrets were remotely controlled with the help of analog computers. This drastically increased accuracy of the weapon, since it could account for factors such as airspeed, lead, gravity, temperature, and humidity. Moreover, the B-29 was equipped with 2 radars. The AN/APQ-13 radar allowed the Superfortress to drop bombs accurately through cloud cover, which was a significant improvement over the line-of-sight bombing. The second AN/APG-15B radar helped gunners to hit enemy fighters with more precision. The weapons computer just had to get a sight on an enemy aircraft for 1 second. The software on the computer would then ensure it was a kill. But that was marketing. In reality, the radar didn't work very well. All guns could also concentrate fire on a single target if needed. This was accomplished with the help of sighting stations that had to work in unison. Otherwise, they would fall out of sync and miss fire. By early 1945, most of the remotely controlled turrets were removed to lighten the load, leaving only the tail gun. At one point, the B-29 acted as an aircraft carrier. It was used as a test platform for launching parasite fighters such as the ex-F-85 Goblin. The Goblin was a prototype fighter aircraft which was intended to be deployed from the bomb bay of the giant B-36 bomber with the help of a trapeze. With the trapeze fully extended, the engine would be air-started and the Goblin would be released from the mothership. For recovery, the parasite fighter would approach the mothership from underneath and link up with the trapeze using a retractable hook in the aircraft's nose. But this was easier said than done and demanded matched skills from the pilot during docking. Later advancements in aerial refueling eliminated the need for parasite fighters and resulted in the cancellation of the Goblin program. A nice quality of life improvement compared to previous bombers was that the Superfortress cabins were soundproof, which meant that no bulky headsets had to be used for communications. But the quality of life improvements didn't matter when the aircraft was more likely to kill you than enemy fire. Out of over 30,000 sorties, 414 B-29s were lost while bombing Japan. Out of those, 147 were lost to flak and Japanese fighters, and 267 due to mechanical failures. This meant that for every B-29 lost to enemy fire, almost 2 were lost because of mechanical issues. And the most common problem was engine fires. When the Wright R3350 engine overheated, the magnesium alloy engine case ignited at 5,616 degrees Fahrenheit, instantly burning through the wing spar. The magnesium alloy is no longer used in engines for this reason, but back then it was used to reduce weight. The B-29's manual actually said that uncontained engine fire could cause wing separation in 90 seconds. As a matter of fact, 87% of engine fires could not be extinguished because the engine fire suppression system was inadequate. This meant that the fire would burn through the wing, forcing it to snap off. No wonder many pilots would rather fly B-17s than B-29s. But the reason the engines overheated was because the rear cylinders had inadequate cooling and couldn't dissipate the heat. Combined with oil loss and poor design, the exhaust valve would fail and get ingested into the engine, causing a fire. To make matters worse, the B-29s were launched toward Japan from tropical islands in exuberant heat. This gave the bombers less than 20 minutes from engine start time to get into the air. Otherwise, the engines would overheat. During takeoff of a fully loaded bomber, pilots had to constantly adjust power versus how much air they diverted to cool down the engines. The more air diverted, the more drag. Too little air and the engines would overheat and blow up. If they lost any engines within the first 5 to 10 minutes, they would end up at sea. This is why the takeoff phase was deemed one of the most dangerous parts of the B-29 flight. That's in fact when most of the engine fires occurred. The pilots joked that the airplane had more 3-engine time than 4-engine time. Eventually, the overheating issue was resolved with the help of baffles that redirected a stream of air onto exhaust valves, and the oil leaks were fixed with good old asbestos. The engine fires were troubling the B-29 program from the very beginning. On the third test flight, the XB-29 engine caught on fire and crashed into a factory in Seattle, killing 11 crew members and 20 factory workers. Many thought that was the end of the program, especially that the prototype XB-29 was piloted by the most experienced test pilot at the time in the United States, Edmund T. Allen. If Edmund couldn't fly it, who else could? But how did the US Army Air Forces allow such a deadly airplane to enter service? When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, the B-29 was just a design on paper. But after the attack, the government wanted the airplane to be delivered within 2 years and produced at a rate of 25 per month. The Superfortress was to be a bomber beyond all bombers and an ultimate machine that would win the war. To achieve this goal, the prototype, the design, the construction of the factory, and the manufacturing of the plane had to happen all at the same time. This meant that the plane had to be mass-produced even before the Boeing engineers would know for sure that the airplane design and all its systems worked as intended. In just 18 months, a giant factory was built in Wichita, Kansas, in the middle of wheat fields. This wasn't just a bomber project, but an industrial project that had never happened at such scale in the United States. Thousands of suppliers built 40,000 different parts, ranging from wings and propellers to tires. All these components were stitched together by 1 million rivets across 4 main plants. The aircraft design was changed so much and so often that the aircraft flew from the factory straight into modification depots, where it was essentially rebuilt to include the most recent changes. Since this airplane was a new technology, it meant that some things were not going to work from the start. So there were multiple accidents, followed by delays and more delays. This battle against time was called the Battle of Kansas. And time was critical, considering that American forces were suffering thousands of casualties as they battled from one island to another in the Pacifics. The head of the Army Air Forces, General Hap Arnold, bet his career on the B-29. He believed that the only way to win was to bomb Japan's industrial base. General Arnold arrived in Wichita in March 1944, expecting to take deliveries of 100 bombers, but he was told only 15 were airworthy. He exploded at Boeing. But being realistic, he instructed more workers to be sent to modification depots. This resulted in 150 B-29s being made airworthy in just over a month. This event became known as the Kansas Miracle. By the summer of 1944, factories were producing 50 B-29s per month. The Superfortresses were arriving into the Pacific air bases by dozens, and eventually by hundreds. In total, almost 4,000 bombers were produced. With bomb bays packed, the bombers took off from newly constructed runways in recently captured islands like Saipan. The bombings started. The Battle of Japan was now underway. But another Superfortress secret mission was dependent on the success of the Manhattan Project. This secret mission was to drop nuclear bombs over Japan. By spring of 1945, most of the Japanese Imperial Air Force was destroyed, and the B-29s were able to attack more accurately, flying as low as 5,000 feet. Tokyo was destroyed, but Japan refused to surrender. The American forces also took horrible casualties, both the Army and the Marine Corps. The casualties were enormous, so the decision was made to make Japan surrender before the invasion. On August 6, 1945, a modified B-29 bomber called Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. But Japan still refused to surrender. A few days later, Americans decided to drop a second nuclear bomb over Japan, but things didn't go according to plan. On August 9, 1945, a second modified B-29 named Bockscar took off toward Japan while carrying a Fat Man nuclear bomb. The original target for the bomb was supposed to be the Japanese city of Kokura. But the smoke from the earlier bombing raids was obscuring the view. Meanwhile, the instructions for the bomber crew was to actually see the target and not just to rely on radar bombing that the B-29 was capable of. After 3 runs over Kokura and running low on fuel, the target was changed to bomb Nagasaki. But as the B-29 approached Nagasaki, the city was covered in clouds, so they either had to bomb using the radar or ditch the bomb in the ocean. As Bockscar was about to leave, the cloud cover cleared and the bomb was dropped visually. After successfully dropping the nuclear bomb, the B-29 didn't have enough fuel left to return to the home base, so they had to divert to Okinawa. As Bockscar was about to land, one of the engines ran out of fuel and stopped. And then, after the plane landed and was taxiing, another engine ran out of fuel. That's how close Bockscar came to running out of fuel. On September 2, 1945, Japan surrendered aboard USS Missouri. The war was over. It is widely believed that if the invasion of Japan was to take place, tens of thousands of lives would have been lost. When the war ended, so did the production of B-29s. Many brand new B-29s were declared as surplus, went straight into storage, and were eventually scrapped. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile. New players or those who haven't played in 6 months will receive a massive bonus pack including 100,000 Silver Lions, 7 days of premium account, and much more. Click below for the limited time offer.